Hi, Lucien. Thank you for having us here at the PPECB head office.
Thank you.
And for the people that don't know, it's the Perishable Products Export Control Board.
You got it spot on.
Perfect. It's a mouthful. I don't even think a lot of people out there know what PPECB stands for.
Well, the term is bandied around so much in the industry, and I think if you stop people and say, "What does it stand for?" they would circle. But thank you. It's nice to be here, and thank you so much for making time to speak to us. Yes. So we wanted to come and hear a bit more about you and what you guys do.
Well, thank you so much, and to Louise and Dewald, thank you for the opportunity. When you called, I didn't hesitate. We're always willing to share, and I saw it as an opportunity to share with people what we do and who we are. So thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time.
Oh.
An absolute pleasure.
So I think let's start with who is PPECB.
Yeah, who are you and what do you guys do?
We might have a wheat farmer or a cattle farmer listening to this, and he has never heard of PPECB, for instance.
Sure. Do we have a couple of hours to explain?
Much time as you want.
By all means. So the PPCB obviously is a regulator. It's a national public entity that was established back in 1926. Now we must all understand, when the PPCB was established back in 1926, it focused on culture and services. In 1991, we received a mandate from the Department of Agriculture to also conduct inspections, and that is quality inspections, which include obviously looking at phytosanitary aspects to a certain extent. And so the PPCB is a regulator, and we regulate the export of perishable produce, which includes aspects like inspection services, cold chain management services, and aspects of food safety. So in a nutshell, that is who we are. We've got about 31 offices nationally. We employ both permanently and temporary workers, up to, I think, 1,300 in the citrus season, which is the biggest staff complement that we do carry during that season. And we service around, let me think, I think 1,500 activity points. And an activity point can be a cold store, it can be a pack house, and that is what we classify as an activity point.
So that would be Farmer A, Farmer B, Farmer C.
Exactly. Or pack house A, pack house B, pack house C. Or there can be a collection of farmers that deliver at one pack house, and that we count as one activity point.
Okay. So, well, we've only worked with PPCB on the fresh produce side. Do they do like meat products or things like that?
So the two mandates, firstly on the inspection services side in terms of the Agricultural Products Standards Act, also a mouthful. The two mandates that we do carry, the inspection services, we only look at what we call listed agricultural products. And that is your deciduous fruit, your citrus fruit, your subtropical fruit, and so on, maize, and so on and so forth. On the cold chain management side, we look on basically, and to simplify it, anything that requires temperature management during export. So any perishable produce, we must make sure that they are carried at optimum temperatures. So that will include your meats, sometimes your wine, if they choose to carry it under certain temperatures. The weirdest thing that we've inspected in my time was, or that we've looked at in terms of temperature management was snails that went to Europe.
Live ones or dead ones?
Live in hibernation.
Wow.
And I think it was set at around about 4 degrees to keep them in hibernation until they've reached their destination.
Where were you sending these?
Europe. I think it was to France, but definitely somewhere in Europe. I don't know whether it's still being done, but that was years ago when I was still the regional manager in Cape Town. And then years ago, before my time, and then I think it's written up in the PPCB history books, I think we've done placentas, human placentas as well. Culture and management, it was required somewhere for medical purposes, and it needed to be exported under certain conditions. And you can imagine, so our
How do you take core temperatures on that?
I do not even want to know. Fortunately, it was before my time. With the snails, they were actually in bags, and the assessor, if I can recall, had to open one bag and had to place a temperature probe in the middle of it to determine whether the temperature is correct.
My goodness gracious. So, Perishable Products Export Control Board. So
Do you know what it is in Afrikaans?
Nee.
is there such a thing?
Ja, die Raad van Toesig op die uitvoer van bederfbare produkte.
Jeez, that's a mouthful.
So let's stick to the PPCB.
I think so. Because if you try and haul that one out, you're going to confuse a lot of people.
But think about it, if it started in 1928, you said?
1926.
Or 1926,
Yeah.
it was Afrikaans.
It would have
It was, and at the time we've reported to, or the PPCB at the time was not the reporting to the line Ministry of Agriculture, but to Transport, because it was all to do with logistics.
Okay,
And
that's
remember, the objective of the PPCB Act is to ensure that there's orderly exports, or to ensure orderly exports of perishable produce. So that's where the logistical part comes in.
Jeez, okay. So in terms of what you are doing today, where is your where is PPCB's interest split? More towards the inspection side or the transport side?
Towards the inspection side. So the inspection side makes up the majority of, firstly, the income of the PPCB, but also the activities. You remember, the cold chain side is much more consolidated. So 5 or 6 pack houses might send their produce to one cold store, and it will be loaded into either a container or a refrigerated vessel from one cold store. So that sort of, it's more consolidated. So there are more pack houses than cold stores.
So we often get into, because of the nature of our job doing photography and videography in the agricultural sector, and we do a lot of technical stuff.
Yeah.
So we often rub shoulders with the PPECB people and all around the country. So you get to KZN and you'll see people with number plates from the Western Cape.
And we've also bumped into people on the Orange River and then in Natal again.
Yeah.
The same people.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, and I mean, you have a massive operation keeping all those people on the road and making sure that they get everywhere. And I would imagine it also provides a huge opportunity for youngsters entering the agricultural sector. I mean, to be qualified as a PPECB inspector and to work like that. What incredible opportunities and exposure.
Definitely, and over the years, Louise, we've managed to we've created a program because you can be qualified, and the minimum qualification to be an inspector is something within the food sciences industry. So, for example, a national diploma or degree in agriculture, food safety, or one of those degrees or qualifications. And then you can apply to become an inspector. On the assessor side, on the culture and management side, I think we do, to a great extent, we do take people with a matric. But then there's a huge period that they spend in order to get trained properly to know what exactly they need to do. On the inspection side, even though you do have a qualification, we still have a program running in order to train these youngsters in order to get to know and to understand the PPCB, but also the export industry and what they need to do on a daily basis.
Okay. I always ask people, if you're standing around a braai, and it's a group of people you've never met before, you invited there the first time. Now it's always, hi, who are you? And then what do you do? So if people have got no idea of what it is that you do and you meet them for the first time, what do you tell them?
Well, I try to simplify it. I don't start off with the PPECB.
Okay.
I normally say that I work within the export or the perishable export industry. And then they will be interested and they want to know what exactly do we do. And then I start explaining, listen, we look after all the perishable produce, all the fruits, all the vegetables that gets exported from South Africa to make sure that they land in a good quality on the other side. And then I get bombarded with questions.
I was about to say, I would imagine then that's when people look at you with a frown and say, what?
Exactly. So not a lot of South Africans actually know that, firstly, there's an organization like PPCB, but the magnitude of what South Africa export. Not a lot of people know that.
And also, how important is PPECB to our local market?
Yeah. So the PPCB obviously only focuses on exports.
Yes.
So only when it gets exported. Once it is allocated for the local market, a different mandate kicks in. So there are other departments and other entities looking at that part. We only focus on what gets exported. And we often criticize to say that South Africa sends their best produce overseas and we're left with the below standard or the substandard product.
Well,
which is not always the truth.
No, it's not always the truth. And traditionally that people always thought that. But the point is it's about economics.
Yes.
And sometimes if you think about it, if you stand back and you think about it, the stuff that's exported gets to the shelf and to the consumer a lot longer, a lot later, and not as fresh as the local stuff. So sometimes you can be harvesting from the same orchard or vineyard, and the local stuff is eaten next week, and the exported stuff is eaten next month.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also, yes, the very best of the best is sent overseas because it makes the most money for us, or supposed
growers,
to, or supposed to. But the stuff we will find on our shelves, unless it's a top brand retailer that's got a cold chain in place, other places don't invest a lot of money in cold chain, especially now with load shedding. It's the quality of the thing is not going to be the same.
Yeah.
Because you've the PPCB and everybody along the way have managed that cold chain to the other side of the world.
True. So I think what we need to understand is, remember, for the export market, because the journey can be anything, let's take to Europe, anything from 18 to 22 days. It can be on the water. That is not even the time it's spent in the cold store, in the terminal, and the whole loading and inspection process. That's excluding that. So we need to understand that if you do send something, for example, like citrus to Europe, you need to make sure that the color over these 18 to 20 days at time of departure is, it needs to still ripen over the 18 to 22 days, 2 days. So when it lands there, it is at the ideal color. The acid ratios that we look at is completely different to what is required for the local market, because it must have the legs in order to achieve or to get to that market in a good condition.
So a lot of people don't know is that the acid keeps it fresh.
Exactly. So not necessarily, amongst other things, but it gives
It does need to be there.
It needs to be at a certain level. And then we look at the sizes. Remember, the what certain markets require, it's different to what the South African market will require. So certain markets are big on grapefruit, for example. We know South Africans are not big on eating and buying grapefruit from your local retailer. It's just not what we do. But if you look at other markets like the East, bigger on grapefruit again. Sizes. Certain markets prefer your big sizes. Certain markets prefer your smaller sizes. So all of that plays a role in terms of what gets approved for exports.
And I also think something that a lot of local South Africans probably have not ever dwelt upon or thought about is that from the time something is picked here until the time the consumer is eating it on the other side, that length of time is long. As you say, it can be 5 weeks.
Can be something to Asia, 35, 40 days sometimes.
Yeah. So it whatever that you guys are passing, you're putting your names to it, and it's important that you have to have you guys there doing what you're doing.
And also the South African market, because take for instance a plum.
Yeah.
When have you bought a plum in a shop that tasted nice?
Yeah.
Not often.
It's not always
because it's picked along with the ones that must go overseas.
Yeah.
So if you buy plums, it must lay on your kitchen table or your fridge for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, in order to obviously to
ripen it.
To ripen, yeah.
And I think the same with grapefruit. The local market has not tasted something nice.
But back to PPECB. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I've heard that South Africa is one of the few countries in the world that actually has a organization dedicated to what you do. That we just unfortunately take it for granted a little bit, but that this doesn't exist necessarily in other countries.
Not to the same extent that the PPCB obviously conducts its inspections and what we do, sort of the whole package that we do deliver and as a service to South African exporters. So there are similar inspection bodies in other countries like the Netherlands, Morocco, Germany, but it's very focused and very targeted. Where the PPCB, the type of inspections we conduct, we conduct inspections on each and every consignment that gets exported. We also then
2%. 1%, 2%.
2% on average. 2% on average.
So to clarify, that's if a container takes X amount of pallets, it's 2% of the boxes of that.
Yeah, that's correct. And obviously, there's the whole inspection process and the effort that we put into that in order to make sure that sort of complies with both exporting standards, but also international standards, food safety regulations, the culture and management side. And what is unique about the PPCB is that culture and management, it's especially the culture and management side. There's not other organizations that does the culture and management to the extent that the PPCB does.
And it's a massive undertaking that you do, because we know, because we've seen it up close and personal, having to go into all those the pack houses that are preparing stuff for special markets and things like that, and the probe readings and the cold tunnels and all of that. It's a huge undertaking that you do on behalf of our industry. So, I mean, when people talk about quality, we know South Africa, before it leaves our shores, it's got that inspection, the stamp of approval.
Yeah, and I think what's important, just to touch on the point of quality, I think the feedback that we normally get from our international counterparts is the consistency in terms of quality. So if you ask for a class 1 orange, you know what it will look like in Europe from South Africa's point of view, because we make sure that class 1 must be this size, it must be this color, it must have this acid or sugar content, or what the case may be. And that is what they sort of always commend South Africa on.
Okay.
And can PPECB expand internationally?
Well, yes. Do we want to? Or
should we?
Should we? I think those are all different questions. So we should understand that what we do is all mandated by legislation. So our whole existence is obviously in terms of legislation, and how we establish and how we set up, how we structure it, it's all contained in legislation basically. So it will be very difficult. I mean, if we do operate or expand internationally, we won't have a legal standing in another country, because there's no legislation protecting us or giving the importers or the exporters that guidance or the statutory measures to say this is what needs to happen in the absence of legislation.
But okay, so maybe just to refine that question slightly, instead of thinking about expanding internationally, are you able to provide assistance to our neighboring countries where they need assistance with any kind of quality stuff?
Certainly, and we have done so in the past. I think we've, for the past, let me think, 5-6 years, we've been working quite closely with Namibia. They've got an inspection body, and they've requested that the PPCB assist them with development of standards, training the inspectors, and we've entered into a memorandum of understanding with them years ago. And we obviously work together with them. We've managed to train the inspectors. They came to visit us. We gave them exposure to what we do. And we've done so with other countries as well, in order to make sure that they're also up to a certain standard.
So they will then operate independently with their service, or does PPECB cross the border and go do it?
We literally, for the past couple of years, at the end of the year, we would send inspectors over to Namibia, Ausenkier, specifically for the grape inspections. And they will then work with the Namibian inspectors and do in-field or on-site training with them and assist them.
It's pretty cool so that South Africa is actually helping our neighboring countries to get themselves up and going with the quality inspection. That's incredible, actually.
No, I think a lot of the neighboring countries, they fall within the Southern Africa brand or name, and they've got to mostly use our ports. So.
They do. If you take, for example, Namibian grapes, they come down to Cape Town. Most of the grapes come down to Cape Town. It gets exported, obviously in bond, out of Cape Town port.
Explain to the people that don't know, what is bond storage?
So it's kept separately from South African produce. So it's basically may not be mixed with South African produce. So it remains separate, completely separate, obviously due to the fears of cross-contamination for phytosanitary reasons. However, in terms of legislation, if that product comes in contact, or any product, share the same cooling space as a South African product, it is then regarded as a South African product and needed to be treated as such.
Okay, what's the implications on that? Because obviously there is implications on
that. They need to then abide by South African export standards. So the PPCB then can claim a right of inspecting those produce.
Okay.
So that's I can imagine that there's a whole lot of stuff down that road if you have to go there and do
legislation.
that.
And legislation. But I mean, if something is, is exported or imported into South Africa, not kept in bond, it is then regarded as a South African produce, and they need to be subjected to the same legislation, because then it literally comes from South Africa.
And if I understand correctly, that will then technically be imported into South Africa, which carries a certain set of costs.
Yeah.
And then that will then have to be exported from South Africa, which then also carries costs.
Well, inspection cost,
Yes.
cooling cost, all
But if
associated with this logistical cost.
If it comes, let's say, from Namibia, again, help me if I'm wrong.
I'll try my best, Dewald.
Comes across the border, it's on a truck,
Yeah.
comes down to one of the storage houses in Cape Town. It will go into a dedicated Namibia bonded cooling tunnel.
Yeah.
And that is then, that surface area is then regarded as Namibian soil.
Well, that is not in bond anymore, because then it shares the same cooling space. Usually it comes already loaded into a container across the border. That is the easiest way of doing it, because then it doesn't mix with South African produce in any way.
Okay.
Thanks for explaining that.
If it comes down in a truck, which it hardly ever does.
How do they then manage the special market stuff?
Well, who's that now? Namibia?
Yes.
Or South Africa?
Namibia.
Well, Namibia, it will probably be loaded into a container directly.
So it will have cold steri,
It
everything.
will have cold sterilization, cold cool down, up or down to the required temperature, and then exported.
So the 2 days that the thing is on the road, it will go through the forced cooling process.
Yeah.
And then
forced cooling in the cold store, cool down to a specific temperature, and then it will be loaded into a container.
Okay.
Interesting, because we also saw Namibian citrus going through
Zimbabwean citrus.
sorry, Zimbabwean. I remember when you had to go and film that and go and see that happening.
In Durban, yeah.
So it's interesting that we are exporting stuff from quite a number of our neighboring countries as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But what was interesting there is why I'm asking is that the citrus came down ambient temperature trucks to the cold, to the bonded stores in Durban.
Was there a bonded store?
Yes.
Then it's fine.
But in terms of grapes, it's because I'm curious.
It's usually loaded into a container in Namibia. It's mostly containerized in Namibia, the grapes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then that forced cooling part will have to happen in the container.
It will probably happen in the container, depending on which market they choose.
Yes.
Obviously, it depends on the market. For example, there are certain countries that require a land-based sterilization process, where the cooling needs to happen
most citrus.
in the cold store. Others can do it in transit, so it can happen in the container. So there's a bit of a difference between certain countries, and that is dependent on the bilateral agreement that was signed.
So if you look at PPECB holistically, the whole organization and all the people, and you look at where we are and looking into the future, the fruit industry has been growing quite rapidly, particularly the citrus industry and the blueberries and the avos, to some extent the grapes. But obviously you guys are having to expand your services to keep up with this.
Yeah.
How's that going, and how is it looking into the future?
Well, the more obviously there's a direct correlation between the increase in volumes and the increase in the number of inspectors, because we conduct a 2% sample. So the more 2% samples you need to conduct, the more consignments, obviously, based on volumes, the more inspectors we require and assessors we require to conduct those inspections. So we've got an internal training program, which was, I think it's currently sitting at the NQF level 4, if I'm not mistaken, and where we do take students every year, up to 45, 50 students from universities, from colleges or technicons, and we put them through this program. It's called the Agricultural Export Technologist Program, which has been quite successful. I think we started this program back in 2008, and we trained them up to become PPCB inspectors, and that is sort of our pipeline to make sure that we do have enough people to service the industry and to deal with the growth in volumes.
So they will then do this course, and then they will. Do they then accompany an inspector for a time, or do they go into the field?
It's a both a theoretical sort of course, and then it's obviously then they are shadowing inspectors, and they are evaluated, and then they are signed off by what we call specialists in PPCB to determine whether they are up to a certain level to operate independently.
And how long does that take?
Well, we always say you become a fully confident PPCB inspector in 2 years' time.
Okay.
So after 2 years, we believe you're at that level. You've gone through 2 citrus seasons, 2 grape seasons, 2 apple seasons. So you've seen all the different, or not all, but most of the sort of quality issues that's possible in those seasons.
Interesting. So I'm just thinking now. So can somebody that's a big grower who's got his own in-house QC have one of his people trained up to do that, but he doesn't become a PPCB officer?
Can. We've done that in the past. We have assisted in-house QCs of your bigger pack houses in order to make sure they understand what we as PPCB inspectors will look at, which it's beneficial to us because when you get there...
less work.
Yeah, it's less work. And you can go through the inspection much quicker.
And can somebody like that have his own little QC company? So, for instance, I come and do the course now for 2 years and do everything, and can I then market myself as I'm an independent QC?
You may.
Oh,
you may. That's outside of the PPCB's mandate, as long as you are still presenting your produce for inspection to the PPCB prior to export.
Yes.
So you can have all the quality controls in place before you present it to the PPCB.
Always the entrepreneur, Dewald.
It's good.
I'm curious because we were talking about young people and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. And what opportunities are out there.
Yeah, on a physical level, it's not a difficult job. And it's very repetitive, so you don't have to think a lot on your feet. You just got to make sure that what you must look for is looked for, and
you must know the regulation.
And,
yes,
and you must, as we have seen, you must sometimes make the unpopular call and stick to your guns.
Many times. Many a times you must make the unpopular call.
And many a packhouse manager, when the PPECB inspector arrives, they do tend to take note and stand on attention, as they should, because quality is quality.
And it's their product. So obviously they've got an interest.
Yes.
And they question, and they need to question the decision of the inspector.
Yeah.
And we have, over the years, we've sort of adopted a more customer-centric approach. And one of the aspects of that is explain to the packhouse manager to say that I have rejected this for the following reasons.
Yes.
So that the person can know exactly why it has been rejected. No questions asked, it's not a mystery, it's in the regulation, this is why I have rejected it.
And can you as a packhouse manager then, let's say you were rejected and you were explained this is why, can you ask the officer to redo another 2% sample, another random 2% sample to check it again?
So a 2% is a 2%. So it's based on the 2%. And remember how it works is, and most of the time the inspectors do that, 2% is the legislative or the minimum, the accepted minimum. You can make it 3%, 4%, 5%. If you are not satisfied with the 2%, and you can base your decision on that extended sample as well.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so we've discussed the inspection services quite a lot, and I mean that's the skeleton of PPCB, and it's what you guys do. But I think something which I have found quite interesting is all the post-harvest temperature regulation stuff that you do for the special markets, and even things like preparing the holds of the ships before you load and getting all of that stuff ready. I mean, I don't think people know about all of that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So a big part of cold chain management also includes what we call equipment certification. And it starts off with, let's take a container depot. It starts off with registering that container depot and declaring it suitable to handle containers destined for exports. So that is an annual process. There's basically an inspection done or audit conducted annually, and then that depot gets registered if it complies with the standards that we've put down. Then at the container depot, we do have inspectors on a daily basis that inspect these containers, making sure they are clean, making sure there are no unwanted smells in the container, making sure that they are seaworthy, no holes on the sides, and making sure they are technically sound as well. They can carry or withstand or keep the temperatures whilst on the water for the extended period. So if it's set at 0.5 degrees, it can remain at 0.5 degrees for 22, 18, or whatever the requirement is days. So once the inspector is then, or the container is then presented to the inspector or to the assessor, it gets signed off and then it gets sealed. And then it goes into what they call an AV stack. It's now available to be selected.
And it has the little blue seal on it.
Yellow seal.
Is it a yellow seal?
The PPCB seal is yellow.
Okay.
And usually the shipping line, after it has been loaded, puts on a blue seal.
Okay.
So the indication and the seal is numbered. It's traceable.
Yes.
It's linked to a container and to a batch. So we will know exactly if it's a seal that was not attached by a PPCB inspector.
Okay.
So
it helps to, it obviously helps to control the whole process if you're there from the start.
And obviously it gives integrity to the process.
Yeah.
And then after the container has been inspected, we obviously are involved with the loading or the stuffing of the container at the cold store. So we make sure while the produce is not in a container, it's at a certain temperature as per our temperature regime codes, and then we monitor the loading of the container. So we make sure that there's enough space between the upper part of the pallet and the roof of the container to allow for proper air circulation. We make sure again that the temperature of the container is set at the correct temperature. So if it was for citrus, we know it must be set at this temperature and what it was, as we call, booked at, to be set at. That we make sure of, and then we make sure that the doors are closed, obviously, and we check that the container seal is...
And the probes on the inside too.
If it's a special market, then we make sure that the probes are inserted correctly, that the probes are working, that we get a proper reading from the probes, and all of that is then recorded, and it goes to the PPCB regional office as part of records. The container then travels to the port terminal, where we again have people in the port terminal, making sure that these containers are still at the optimum temperature. They set correctly, they are plugged in, they're working, there's no alarms recorded on the container, and it's also recorded then as such. It gets then recorded against the original booking that was made for that container to be shipped. And then obviously there's an auditor in the office to make sure it's all in line, and then it gets obviously shipped. And then we issue, from a PPCB point of view, we issue a temperature letter. We call it a carrying temperature instruction letter. To the master of each vessel, saying that, sir, you've got these containers on board, South African containers, they carry the following produce, make sure they are set at the following temperatures. It gets handed to the master of the vessel, and whilst the vessel is on board, it gets reported every day to the PPCB office to say that, listen, container number 123 is at this temperature. And the guy in the office on the PPCB side will make sure container number 123 should be at that temperature.
Sure.
If not, there's the intervention that needs to happen.
So I presume you've got big servers carrying all this data.
We do. We've got most of our critical services are now in the cloud.
Yeah.
Don't ask me which one, but it's somewhere in the cloud.
And sometimes it's a thundercloud.
It can be a thundercloud. It can be any type of peculiar numbers. It can be a serious one of these clouds. No, we actually got very strict, obviously, with our ICT service providers and our internal department. We've got very strict rules in terms of which cloud it is, the services, and all of those.
This is very valuable data.
Yeah.
Incredible operations and what you do, and keeping data of all of that and keeping track of all of it.
How did they do it in 1926?
And what I wanted to add, a massive responsibility.
Oh. It is. So I believe in 1926, obviously the principles are still the same. Obviously the services have improved, their volumes are bigger, and we needed to become more effective and ensure that we are efficient. But I know in the 80s, I don't know guys that was working for PPCB in the 1926s, but there are still people around that worked for us in the 70s, 80s. And obviously you listen to these stories. and in terms of how things were done. And we should remember in 1997 the industry became much more regulated or deregulated.
Yeah.
It was regulated before that, and PPCB had a much more controlling role. So the vessel, for example, would have been planned, the layout of the vessel would have been planned by the PPECB. Said, listen, vessel number 1, you will so obviously dock then. Here's the vessel plan. Citrus will be loaded at hatch number this, and so on and so forth. And there will be a whole vessel plan and layout. And that was actually done by the PPCB.
Do you still have a lot of those records? Or how long do you keep them for?
We do have some of those records.
Wow.
And the PPCB actually has got two. We released one earlier this year, a history book, where some of these things have been actually documented.
Okay.
Wow.
In terms of
I'd love to see that. But
Well,
I mean,
I
the
would love to give you a
responsibility.
book.
Oh, shame. Well, thank you. The responsibility of keeping, I mean, the value of that fruit is massive. And I mean, if it's being handed over to you to check the quality, but also to ensure that the temperature is maintained all the way through, that's a big responsibility for you guys to have.
It is, and I think over the years we often, we actually understood or became aware of that responsibility, because the market has become very competitive, the global market, and obviously the value of a consignment have increased significantly over the years, and I think we became aware of the significant role that the organization actually plays in ensuring that that cargo is well looked after and it's landed in a good condition on the other side.
Sure.
Wow.
Indeed.
Interesting.
Indeed.
Okay. So from my side, who's Lucien? Where did you come from?
Yes, we just fell in about the business. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I was born in Robertson.
Okay.
I'm from Robertson, born and bred there, went to school there, married a wife from Robertson.
Okay.
And we moved to Cape Town and I started working for PPCB back in 2005. I was appointed as a regional service manager in Cape Town. I think I should roll back a bit. I started my career as a health inspector. So I do have a sort of a quality background. Started as a health inspector, and then applied for a position at PPCB in 2005. Successful. Started as a regional manager in Cape Town. Then took on a bit of other responsibilities in the organization on the quality side. Took on the regional manager role in Grabouw, and then I became a project manager in PPCB. And I think in 2011, I became the general manager for corporate affairs in PPCB. And 2015 was appointed as CEO.
Well done.
So that in short is who I am.
Okay. Well, it's been fascinating hearing all about what you and your team have done and are doing. And I mean, we know about PPCB and we always see them where we go. And they're always flipping or getting on with doing their stuff. I mean, even when we have to go and film inside cold storage facilities where we are like freezing cold to film the stuff, these guys are just going about their business. They're just doing it. It's phenomenal.
Keeping their head down and doing it.
Yes.
Well, we're very fortunate, and we very fortunate actually to have good people working for the PPCB.
Yeah.
One thing is people are very loyal to the business. They stay here for a very long time. I mean, we've got people that's been here for 45 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and every year I sign long service award certificates, probably 20 or 30 long service award certificates, anything from 10 years to 40 years. And it happens every year. And for some reason, people stay with the PPCB.
Yeah, remarkable.
Yeah.
So what is if a youngster comes from school or just finished studying and they don't know what to do and PPCB looks like a possibility for them, is there a lot of career opportunities within the company to go further up the ladder?
Definitely, I think I'm a working example.
Yes.
Started off as a regional manager and ended up as a CEO. And so many people in the organization move around quite a bit. We should remember we don't only have cold chain and inspection services. I mean, we've got ICT, we've got financial services.
ICT?
Information and communications
Okay,
technology.
sorry, thank you.
So we've got a big ICT department because of the data that
Yes,
we
of
work
course.
with, because of the support that we need to provide. We've got a human resources department, also quite big. We've got a huge admin component that we keep. So there are various opportunities within the PPCB. So Pardon, you might start as an inspector and you might end up, and it happened. I mean, I can literally call some people who had started as an inspector and ended up as a business analyst in our ICT department. So
pretty cool.
The career opportunities are there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you've, as you've just explained, you've been part of the business, part of the organization for a long time, and you've obviously been able to observe trends and things like that. If you look down the road, what are the biggest challenges facing you guys, and also where do you see growth coming?
Well, from the PPCB side is, I think I always said, the environment is changing. I mean, when I started in 2005, we had 2 or 3 people in our ICT department. I think we're now 40 people. Sure. Because of the different services that we have and the different support that we need to deliver. So significant growth in terms of in that part of the business.
I can imagine that.
But also on the inspection and culture and services side. So there's a lot of things happening. If you, for example, look at additional services that gets required for citrus inspections. It's not only taking citrus out of the box. There are also other additional services. For example, the EU regulation requires us to do certain things. That requires more resources. It requires attention to detail. It requires more people, more time that you need to spend per carton to conduct that inspection. Hence, keeping up with the growth of in terms of volumes will always be a challenge. We need to make sure we do have the right people. We do have skilled and suitably qualified people with the necessary passion to work for the PPCB and attitude, because it takes a certain personality to be a PPCB inspector. It's not anybody can be a PPCB inspector.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more.
I don't think I will be able to be a PPCB inspector.
Yeah, you need to grow big shoulders and a thick skin.
Yes.
So I think in terms of that, there's a lot of challenges that we face from that point of view. The growth the growth in cost. I mean, we've grown significantly. When I started, I can only take it back from when I started in 2005. I think we were 150 people. As I said earlier, we're now 1,300 people.
Wow.
In season. So that places a lot of strain on your systems, on your administrative support. Everybody needs a laptop or some sort of device. Yes. We drive 5.2, 5.4 million kilometers a year.
Wow.
With the increase in petrol price.
Yeah.
So all of that puts a significant strain on the business. And I mean, we want to keep the cost as low as possible.
Get them those VUCA scooters. It's like 40 kilometers to the liter.
Well, I think the inspection or the documents they carry with will already be too heavy for the VUCAs for the scooter.
We see on the farms those electric scooters that they with a little tipper thing at the back.
Shame. But I think we've just fallen in there and we've assumed certain things. And one of the things that which you haven't really spoken about is you are delivering a service.
Yeah.
And how is this cost covered? Maybe you need to elaborate a little bit on that.
So what we normally look at, firstly I must say we shouldn't make a profit. So we're not profit driven.
Yeah.
We basically just need to cover our cost.
Yeah.
So what we do is obviously we charge per carton that gets presented for exports. On the inspection side, on the cold chain side, we charge for the different service types that we do deliver. For example, loading or monitoring the loading of a container will cost you X amount. So it all depends on the number of containers that we monitor, and we obviously get the income for that. So every year, and this is slam bang in the middle of our budgeting season, we put together a budget. We list all our expenses, and we obviously list all the volumes of the different income of the different products to see the growth and to see where the products will be for the year coming, for next year, 24, 25, our financial year. So we look at that and we need to make sure that the volume and let's say the cost per carton for the different product types can cover the expenses that is related to that specific product type. So it's also a very intense process. All our inspectors, our assessors, all our operational staff complete a timesheet on every week, and time gets allocated to an activity and to a product. So we know exactly the cost of, for example, what citrus inspections cost us the previous year.
Per carton.
Per carton. Yes. Because there's hours allocated to that in order to sort of work away that volume to put it so.
And how you actually get the funds is that there's a levy.
There's a levy. So we publish a levy every year, a statutory levy. And obviously it gets circulated, it gets debated, and we try to keep the levy obviously as close to or below inflation is actually ideal. And that is the levy that gets attached to the...
And growers pay for that?
Eventually the grower will pay. But I mean, people who's obviously has got accounts with us, for example, your logistical service providers, your exporters, they will normally pay the PPCB account on behalf of growers.
Yes, well, someone's got to pay for that amazing service, and I mean, you guys do an incredible job. So, and someone's got to pay for all the services.
Unfortunately,
so, is what it is.
I mean, what people often don't know is the additional services that we do deliver. For example, we've got a seat on at OECD level, which determine or look at the standards for imports into Europe, for example. And our COO is representing South Africa with the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development there. And I mean, these regulations get debated there and agreed and challenged to make it easier for South Africa and other third-party countries to export to Europe. And a small change in legislation can harm South African exports. So that's why we want to be there. We make sure that we attend those meetings to make sure that we at least have a chance in debating and challenging regulations that's proposed.
So on that note, I've got two questions. So now that we're talking about the regulations, is there any news on the EU false codling moth black spot issue that's been circulating in the news that you're allowed to share?
At this stage, not. Okay. So obviously we just ended the citrus season, and we will see what comes from Europe. At this stage,
it's a big issue. But
I've got no news.
We're not going to go down that wormhole now. But it is a big issue.
And the other thing is, how has load shedding impacted your work?
Well, if I think load shedding, I think cost, stress, and so on. So firstly, let's look from an industry point of view. I mean, it disrupts the flow of the let's say the inspection process, the cold chain process. It disrupts it. So people cannot sort of your time that you need to keep your produce under cooling is, for example, 3 hours normally. It's longer, but let's use 3 hours as an indicator. But with load shedding, it can easily extend to 5 hours, and that comes at a cost. The PPCB operations, we had to put in additional staff for night shifts because the planning is completely out. Now, usually the guy would load out or stuff his container at 2 o'clock. Now we can't. Now we can only do it at 8 o'clock tonight. That in itself creates bottlenecks at the cold stores, but also at the port.
And I presume it might be cheaper to employ somebody to work at night shift than to pay overtime.
So we were quite fortunate. So what we've done was we've structured our services, and obviously, again, we want to keep our cost as low as possible. So we have put, people on shifts.
Yeah.
So we would say, you work from 6-2, you work from 2-10, and again, you start at 10-6, or what the case may be. So in season, we've tried to introduce a shift sort of schedule as far as possible to make sure that we are there, deliver a service, but it puts additional strain on the system from a cost point of view, but also from a resource point of view.
And the planning also, because...
And the planning. But we've managed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And one thing about the South African industry, somehow, against all odds, things happen.
A lot of times, the issues and the challenges that face the industry when it comes to rail, port, electricity, actually makes people stand together and work together. There's a lot of that's been happening in the past 3 or 4 years, which didn't really happen before, simply because it was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
That's what I've seen from the outside.
Definitely. I mean, I can take it back to the drought even that we've experienced in 2016, 2017. That forced producers to change the irrigation patterns, for example. Something as simple as that. I mean, they won't irrigate if it's not necessary now. They've got probes in the ground, and if it needs to be irrigated, it gets irrigated. In the past, that wasn't the case. I mean, you would irrigate irrespectively. So take that. If you take the load shedding story, all of a sudden, I mean, people have had to go to solar and look at alternative ways to get electricity. So all of that, somehow people became more innovative with a huge challenge. Obviously, we shouldn't understand this comes at a cost. And somehow they just managed to get together and look at alternative ways to still be successful.
Sure. It's
very, very interesting, because for us to come and speak to you, when we literally, wherever we go, we see the PPECB guys, and women, getting on with their stuff. They're just there, they're doing it. And what an important job that you do on behalf of our fruit industry. And a lot of people aren't even aware of it.
And we've met some really interesting people from PPCB.
Yes.
That is like, they are
very specialized, and they know their stuff.
Yes,
They've been around for a long
not just
time.
that, but you can, the Afrikaans woord is statige mense.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's you, they've got a presence over them.
Yeah.
And it's not a principle, I'm going to smack you over the knuckles kind of.
A policeman.
It's people that know what they do and feel confident in their position of the experience they have and the skill they have, and that they do that every day on behalf of the industry.
Yeah, Louise, you're right. I mean, we've got people with a lot of experience in the business, a lot. I mean, I call on them quite often to say that, listen, I was challenged by a client on this, or I had a request. Please, I need your guidance, I need your advice. And we've got very specialized people in PPCB. If I want to know something about citrus, I know exactly who to call. If I want to know something about subtropicals, I know exactly who to call.
Yes.
Because you've got your, let's say, pockets of excellence, people that only focuses on this. And as you say, they know exactly what they do. They know their work. They know the technical side thereof. They know the theoretical side. So yeah, and they're confident in what they do.
Question, and I'm pretty sure you've in a big company like this, you must have looked at this or thought about this. How can you integrate something like AI in what you're doing?
So I had an idea a couple of years ago, and unfortunately we had a lot of challenges. So let's say in a pack house, opportunities, let's say we all know most of your bigger pack houses has got this machine that checks the quality.
Yeah, the optical sizes.
Exactly. So we were looking at how we can integrate with that in order to point out to the inspector what are the types of problems with a specific batch or consignment. And we looked at that, and it's not off the table as yet, but we've decided to firstly focus on integrating our systems, like our inspection or electronic inspection platform, Titan, to roll that out completely before we venture into aspects like that. So that was one area that we had to look at. And then the utilization of drones. When we were still involved with the orchard inspections, we actually bought a drone and piloted that, and we wanted to go into an agreement with a company that specializes in this. And the idea was that we would fly over an orchard and identify possible areas in that orchard where there might be the prevalence of certain pests or diseases.
Yes.
So that and that will come back to the
because if a lot of the stuff, if you can stop it before it gets to the pack house, it will save a lot of costs.
And the idea is that that information would have been fed back to the inspector's tablet, and he would go exactly to that coordinates in the orchard and conduct the inspection there and focus your attention where the risk areas are, and not walk through the whole orchard to conduct the inspection.
But you said it was a while ago that you looked at that. So obviously with the new interventions of AI, these things could possibly...
I think it's more possible now than even 2 years ago. But as I said, we've decided to firstly focus on completely rolling out our inspection platforms and integrating with all or most clients before we would venture into that, because it takes a lot of effort.
And resources.
Resources, R&D work that needs to go into that, and it will take focus away from the people that we require now in order to focus on certain areas of the business.
Wow.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, because we were having the AI discussion just before we got here.
Yeah, about how it's here to stay, and you must utilize it.
The idea, I think the investment in AI, if you look globally in agriculture, I mean, it's huge. I've read an article the other day, and it's a lot of new things coming through that we can certainly benefit from. But it also costs a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah, it is how it is, and I mean, you as you say, you've got to deliver the service as best you can, as affordably as you can.
Exactly.
So, but watch, it's probably coming.
No, I think the focus for the past couple of years was, Louise and Dewald, was first to ramp up our IT systems, just to make sure that we don't fall behind, that we are on par with the latest and the greatest. So that was the big focus, and I mean, it took a lot of effort and it took a lot of money. It's a huge investment. So I think that was the focus, because you can't go AI if your foundations are not up to scratch. So the first thing is, let's get the foundation right. And now, maybe in a year's time, now we will look at what's possible in terms of AI again. We've got wonderful ideas.
And things like SpaceX, what is it now? Starlink, becoming more readily available.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it's still grey products, but I was reading this morning on websites and where you can go and you can buy the unit. A lot of the pack houses, like we know with our inspections we did, is so far in the sticks that you still need to send smoke signals to get a info there. So things like that will really help a lot with integrating those systems.
Certainly. So we've re-established our research and development department to look at the technology that's available, not only locally but also abroad. What is available for us to tap into? It's cost effective, that we will make a huge impact sort of immediately. So we've identified a couple of things, but as I said, it always pointed to get your basics, get your foundation stable first before you sort of
one can understand that in that you know, you've always got to justify the cost, and it's one of those things that you've got to take it back to basics and build it from there.
Exactly. And if you look at, I mean, we spoke about the growth in volumes, the growth in resources, and obviously, as I said, that it had a huge impact on our ICT systems. So we needed to make sure that it can we cater for the growth, and that is what we have been busy for the past 3-4 years.
Wow.
Due to the investment, I mean, I would have liked to do it within 1 year, but cost is
it is what it is.
Yeah.
So we have I think we've chatted nicely, and I think we've got to the point where we can look at wrapping up. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we covered most of the topics that I think is quite important.
So we have a closing tradition, which is quite fun, because it connects the previous person or someone that we interviewed before you to you and to the next person.
Yeah.
So we ask somebody for a random question, completely random question, anonymously for the next person.
Okay.
So Dewald,
you're also going to give one.
You will also give us one for the next person. It's fun.
Okay.
Okay, and it's something that we've kind of touched on. I want to put it up a little bit differently. How will you, as Lucien, continue making a difference in what you're doing? And also, how will PPECB continue doing that? So it becomes two questions, but you can combine them if you want.
So we will, from my side, I think the most important thing is keep in touch with your clients. Make sure you understand the needs of your clients. We are here to service the clients. I mean, I cannot come up with an idea that I haven't that will not serve the needs of the clients. It doesn't work like that. So I will continue, and we will continue to drive the customer centricity. One of our major objectives, we will continue to drive that, making sure that we understand the industry better every time to make sure that we can continue to make a difference. So that is what we will do from our side. In terms of PPCB, I think it's important that the PPCB also make sure that we can deliver a service that's needed, employ the best people, keep up with technology, remain an organization that deliver a service that's needed, as I say, but also that we can look up to and be proud of as a country. I I think that is what I would like to see the PPCB to be. So that is what I think we will continue to do, or we will strive to do.
Great. That's
fantastic.
it's an amazing answer, and I think you guys are there by what we see out in the field and what you guys do. Just as I say in Afrikaans, do net so voort.
Ons sal probeer.
Okay, Lucien, thank you again for your time, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay,
Dewald,
so
thank you so much. Appreciate it.
great stuff.
Thank you. Bye.